Now it's live. The one thing I forgot to put in the slides is I'll talk about it, or somebody will talk about it at the end. But we also have DevFest coming up. It's our annual conference on December 2nd. And I think Naveen will actually talk about some of what DevFest is and how that works. So welcome. So my name is Jay Whitsitt. I'm a mobile developer at Commerce Bank. And I can just click this so that I don't have to hold it. So I've been doing mobile development for about 10 years. I do native iOS and Android development mainly, but as I think any native developer should, they should expand their knowledge a little bit and see what kind of the cross-platform scape is like. React is definitely not my favorite. I try to avoid that whenever possible. But Flutter has been something that's interested me a little bit. I've written a couple personal apps, nothing professionally, but I have written a couple personal apps in Flutter. And there's been a lot that's changed over the last 5-ish years, I think, since it's really started taking off. And there was a lot announced at I/O this year in May. And so today I was hoping to just kind of talk through some of the main things that have changed. There's a lot that I'm not going to touch on, but today, hopefully, I'll just give an overview of kind of the big things. I was really hoping it started working. That's fine. Who has used Flutter before? Cool. So I'll give just kind of an overview of what Flutter is for anybody that doesn't know. We'll talk about what's new specifically in Material 3, Flutter version 3.10, and kind of 3.13 since that came out since I wrote this, and Dart 3.0. Not going to talk about Dart 3.1 because that's some different stuff. And then Dart, to kind of go over the changes in Dart, there's a code lab that Google put out that gives a really good overview of that. So I'll kind of walk through that. So what is Flutter? So Flutter was, has anybody used Dart separately from Flutter? Okay, so usually when you're going to use Dart, unless you're a Googler, I feel like, Dart is the programming language that Flutter uses, and that's really about the only time that you'll use Dart. Dart was started before Flutter, but they kind of grew up together. And so it's now at this place where the idea is that you can build it once, design it, maybe not design it once, but build it once for any screen, anywhere the user is, whether that's Android, iOS, macOS, Linux, Windows, in your car, embedded systems. I think the Google Home has officially moved to using Flutter. Do you know if that's true? I know it was supposed to use Fuchsia for a really long time. That never really happened. Okay. Oh, it is on Fuchsia? Okay. It's something, for some reason, I was thinking maybe it was like about to come that it was going to move to Flutter.
Flutter can run on.
Okay. I noticed all of the marketing materials for Flutter include the Google Home interface, so I thought that was okay. And on the web, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the changes that were announced this year for web because I think that's really important too. So with Flutter, like any good platform, it has a pretty good set of feature-rich dev tools. So there's like a hierarchy inspector. You can see how much memory your app is using, different performance, whether that's the GPU, CPU, a pretty full-featured debugger, so you can do breakpoints, do live code execution, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Logging, of course, and then hot reload, which I think is really cool. So if you're, as an app developer for a while, iOS and Android apps, the bigger they get, the longer it takes to load, to recompile, and then to install, and then to open. Really cool thing about Flutter is that, similar to React Native, I think does this, as you're coding, it will push the code live. So instead of having to recompile everything, it'll kind of just change things live for you just by saving the file. So really, you can code Flutter. You can build a Flutter app anywhere you want. You can use Vim with terminal commands if you really wanted to. Highly don't recommend doing that because you're missing out on a lot of features. But the main IDEs to use are Android Studio and or IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code. My personal preference is Android Studio. It's a lot more baked into the IDE than Visual Studio Code. Google's definitely just prioritized, and the community's prioritized putting plugins and features in that IDE than VS Code. So like I mentioned, it runs on Dart. Dart is the language that you use to build Flutter apps. It's pretty easy to pick up. Shortly after, I don't know, 1 dot something of Flutter, we did a multi-series, multi-event series on Flutter, just how to build your first app. Go from not knowing anything about it to releasing to the App Store, hopefully. It was pretty easy, I think, for people to pick up, but the hardest part, I think, because declarative languages hadn't really picked up too much, was how to actually put your UI in your code, because your UI is code. It's not necessarily like a layout XML file that's on Android or a nib that would be on iOS. It's actually like the strings that you would use go in your code, and you declare everything in line rather than using some sort of interface builder. And it's modern, so it has async, await, now, and a lot of other really modern language features. When it initially came out, it was a little, you had to kind of figure out how to do the things that you wanted to do. But now, if you're familiar with Swift UI or Jetpack Compose, things carry over pretty well. So that was kind of the introduction to Flutter. Much shorter than what a full introduction to Flutter would be, but hopefully you kind of understand what it is. So I'm going to talk about what's new, specifically Material 3, Flutter 3.10 and 13, and Dart 3. And oh, yes, so since Google I/O, Flutter 3.13 and Dart 3.1. But like I said, 3.1 added some things, but I'm not going to dive into that too much. I think 3.13 did add a couple things that I'll talk about. So if you don't know what material design is, it's kind of a design framework that gives you, conceptually, it gives you just kind of a framework of how to design. So how a switch should react and how text fields should work on the screen. For development, Material gives a set of libraries that let you not have to worry about that logic yourself so much. A lot of it's built into those libraries, and Flutter definitely uses that a lot if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it's usually pretty nice because it just takes care of a lot of the overhead that you'd have to build on your own anyway. So one thing that's pretty visually appealing, if you have already done mobile development, you might be familiar. The name of it's escaping me, but when you build an app, you can give it a color palette. The user can choose their color palette, and it can change every color in the app based on some seed color you give it. So Material supports that, and they added the ability to give a seed image, which I think is pretty cool. So you can give it an image of some sort. Kind of think of it like, I think iOS does it now, but on Android for a while, you could give, you could say, change my phone color scheme to match my background, my home screen background image. You can now kind of do that for the app itself. So that's pretty cool. And then there were a lot of updates to existing widgets that Material 3 kind of talks about. So navigation bar added some new, like the circle around the icon, I think is new, and kind of the way that things interact there. Navigation drawer changed a bit with how that can lay out. Search bar, search anchor, date picker. If you've used a date picker that was in Material 2 or 1, it was not super friendly. Same with time. Those have been updated, so they're not a headache for users or developers as much anyway. And then text fields have always kind of been a little weird, but now they added some fairly standardized interactions. Like if you double tap or triple tap, it'll select, a word or a line. You can drag that selection, things like that. So a lot of just kind of standardizing different use cases that have just kind of come up with over the years. So if you want to use Material 3 in your Flutter app, you do currently have to opt into it. It's not going to come by default. So the way to do that starting in Flutter 3.10 is to just add this one line, use Material 3, set that to true in your theme data object. It's also not defaulted in 3.13, but there was a page that I found that said the plan was to default it on whatever next version comes after 3.13. So we'll see if that happens or not. Yeah. So now I'll kind of get into some of the platform-specific changes. So we'll start with web. I think one of the biggest things that web developers were most excited about, not a web developer, so it didn't excite me too much, but everybody, I think, has been talking about it. So prior to Flutter 3.10, if you wanted to use your Flutter code on the web, it either had to take up the whole window or you had to use an iframe. But maybe you just want to do, like a slow rollout of moving your code from your existing application to Flutter, or maybe you modularized your code so much that you really just want this one section of the app or section of the web page. You can now do that much easier without using iframes. So you'll basically just build your Flutter code. You'll compile it to your JavaScript file. And then this little snippet in that script block, you insert that, and after your page loads, it will basically populate your Flutter app from your main function into that div that you've set up. Yeah, I don't think it was in the keynote. I think it was in a session at I/O. There was a demo of this, and he was using like the Flutter. Oh my gosh, I forgot his name. The Flutter bird, Dart. No. Dash. Thank you. There was like a section on the side that could, mutate Dash somehow. Like it can flip him, it can change his colors, and then the actual Dash animation was in Flutter. And so I thought that was pretty cool. He showed a little bit of code in there too, I think. So if you're interested about that, I would definitely recommend checking the I/O video for that. Just a couple other web improvements. If you use fragment shaders, it was supported on iOS and Android. They added that to the web. So your existing logic for any shaders that you do for some fancy graphics, that carries over to the web now. And then there was just kind of a lot of general performance enhancements and improvements. So one of them, Canvas Kit, was decreased in size on Chromium browsers. And then I don't remember exactly why the faster load times. It could have been because of the Canvas Kit size, but my speaker notes aren't coming up.
I was going to ask what the smallest script that loads it in when you do the inline Flutter. If you happen to know that offhand.
Like if you just do a hello world or something,
Yeah,
and
basically.
how big that is, I don't know for sure. I don't know off the top of my head. I know on the mobile side, it definitely is bigger than if you did a native app. And I know that it's also bigger if you do part of your app in Flutter and part of your app native. It's like you inject your Flutter into your native code. There's some overhead that has to happen size-wise, but I don't know off the top of my head. So on that note, switching to the mobile side, one of the biggest mobile improvements is the introduction of Impeller. So that's the graphics engine that runs kind of in the background to lay things out on the screen. Is a very high-level explanation. So in changing that underlying engine, they really did it from the ground up. So this if you've watched any of the videos from IO, a lot of times they'll reference this specific app, Wondrous, that's on the App Store. It's super graphics intensive. You can see there's lots of animations as you scale or as you scroll. Like that image moved separately than the left image, and this map kind of animates up. That text moves. Yeah, like so much parallax, so many just like transparent layers, super graphics intensive. I think I can actually say how much. I think this company said that it was somewhere in the realm of like, they took their performance and it was a third of the CPU. So like basically same app, nothing else changed, using Impeller, it uses a third of the CPU.
That's pretty much what I saw on my app. So
Yeah.
It's like a 30% reduction in render time.
Yeah. I haven't personally had super graphics intensive apps in Flutter, so I haven't been able to do that myself, but that's awesome that you're able to get that too. So that is now the default on iOS in Flutter 3.10. In 3.13, it's in preview on macOS, but you have to opt into it. And then it's not yet on Android. The last blog post that I read from the Flutter team said that they're planning on doing it soon. It's just not quite ready. It just wasn't ready on their regular quarterly updates. And then just some other miscellaneous iOS improvements. There was a bunch of issues that were all related to, it turns out, this like weird usage of transparent backgrounds on some views. The Flutter team or somebody realized like, hey, if I just set my background color, suddenly my app works. So there are some improvements around that. I think the frame rate was, again, like half or third, or either doubled or like 150%, I think was like the metric that I saw, which is wild. It really makes me question if I ever should use transparent background colors again, but I thought that was pretty important. There was some improvements around local image processing. I guess if you did it, if you just did it without really thinking about threading, then it would like super bog down the CPU usage of your app just in general. And I think it would actually do it on the main thread by default. So now that's done in its own background thread. So simultaneous images can load like significantly faster. There were some startup latency improvements, I think, because there's just some like unimportant libraries were being loaded for some reason. So a lot of that stuff was cut out. Wireless debugging was added. I don't personally use wireless debugging a lot. Since Android Studio started supporting it more, I think it's always supported it, or at least for a long time, but they've definitely put that in the forefront just for Android apps. I've toyed with it a little bit. So in Android Studio on an Android app, it's still kind of weird to get it to work. So I don't know exactly how easy it is, but wireless debugging is now supported on iOS. Have you tried it on iOS?
Yeah, I've tried it on both. It is technically more stable on iOS if you can get it to work. And usually that just involves like opening Xcode and getting everything connected and set up through there. And then sometimes if it's just like not connecting, you'll have to do a Flutter clean and then just kind of like restart it.
Fun.
But Android is mostly pretty good, but
cool.
Depending on what version of Android you're using, it'll turn off the wireless debugging sometimes on the phone, not on
so that's what
on the computer.
Yeah, I ran into that a few times. Like if you didn't use it long enough, it'll just turn it off, which is a great security feature. But if I'm actively coding, like I don't really want you to do that. This was something interesting. I didn't realize that Flutter was not using the native spell checker, but now it should use the native spell checker on iOS. So your iOS users should be pretty familiar with that interface rather than using something, some plugin or something that you would add to your app. So I think kind of along with the Material 3 came better usage of the UI feel for native components. So checkboxes, radio buttons, and some other UI elements. And then it's also something I didn't get to toy with, but it did mention better app extension support, specifically for things like home screen widgets. So I think it was iOS 13-ish, added home screen widgets, 13 or 14, somewhere around there. I remember hearing that there were some issues if you wanted to add an extension, but you basically just had to have your Flutter app, and then you would have to go to Xcode and then just do everything in Xcode for your app extension. The theory, I think, now is that you can do that in Flutter. And so if you have an iOS widget and an Android widget, those two can share some of the same code better than you having to kind of build this backdoor into your home screen widgets. So a few Android improvements, Camera X support, which is super cool for any Android developer. It doesn't support the like live processing. So like if you want to analyze the preview, I don't think it supports that quite yet, but it does support the basic image preview. So just displaying that preview, image capture and video capture, super great. And then improved foldable support. So if you have, your Galaxy Fold or your Pixel Fold, or maybe the iPhone Fold, I don't think it's going to happen. It'll be next year at least. So. Yeah. So better support for those, so that those can kind of work alongside your other apps. And then I think this is the last mobile piece. Although it's not really mobile, it's for all platforms. So this was something I did run into in one of the personal apps I wrote. I needed to know if the user went to the background or they came back, or like if they got a call. It's not really, it is backgrounded, but it's just paused. Like the user didn't choose to close it. There is now app lifecycle management, like actually in it. You don't have to use a plugin, and it's for. I didn't see anywhere that said all platforms, but I did see that it was Android, iOS, Linux, macOS, and I think Windows. So web was the only one that I couldn't figure out if it actually supported it, which could be kind of weird, because I guess you can switch to another tab and that would be backgrounding it. But
I think that's also because like browsers tend to sandbox more.
Yeah.
To prevent web developers from doing really creepy stuff.
That's fair. Yeah.
So, there's here and there.
Pros and cons to that. Yeah. So that was added in Flutter 3.13. That was not in 3.10. Cool. Any questions about kind of what's added on the platform side? And I do have the chat up for anybody that's on the live stream. So definitely, if you have questions, you can just ask in the chat.
Well, that was earlier when he was trying to figure out what the
word was.
Yeah.
Your material you.
Yes, material you. That was the on Android, you can change your color of your app based on a specific color. Thanks. So now we'll get into kind of some Dart features. So better native interop. I kind of had to figure out exactly what they meant by that, because interop, I think, can be used in a lot of ways. What it kind of seemed like this meant was things, kind of the way applications work has been standardized more or less just naturally. So push notifications work kind of a certain way. Like camera access works kind of similarly across platforms now. So there's a little bit more standardization across the board about how those that interoperability works. So you don't have to necessarily use a plugin. The plugin code supports doing Android, iOS, web. The platform itself kind of supports that more itself, rather than you having to go out for third-party support. And then also compilation to WebAssembly was a pretty big thing, where I heard a lot of people talking about it. Again, as a mobile developer, doesn't super excite me. But I think it is really cool that with WebAssembly, you don't have to worry quite as much about what browser versions. If it supports WebAssembly, that's a much lower level, drawing on the canvas, compiler level execution instructions. That's the word I was trying to find. So it just gives a lot better experience. And it seems like some of the web industry is starting to kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah, WebAssembly is opening up doors to allow statically based languages like C# and Java to be able to actually work in web application development. So it's I know on the .NET side, they've been doing it for a few years at least with their version of it. But I think all of them have been contributing to WebAssembly in some form or fashion to keep making it evolve. And I did hear something about Java wanting to work with WebAssembly.
Let's go back to the Java applet, please.
Well, they're
Full
all
circle.
Yeah.
We're bringing back Flash.
Oh gosh.
No.
Yeah, so right now, if you did it, if you built a Flutter app for web, it would compile basically to JavaScript, which is really interesting to go read if you have a free 2 days and you want to figure out what that says. But with WebAssembly, it's actually something that I also think that it wouldn't have the same, JavaScript security issues. Like you can't really read that quite as well as you can JavaScript. And then also, finally, 100% sound, null safety. Sometimes 99% is fine, but it does now have 100% null safety out of the box. I don't think you can even disable it now. It's been in preview for a little bit, but I think Dart 3 was like, this is it. We are now forever 100%. And then they added a few kind of modern, not structures, but different patterns to use, records, patterns, and class modifiers. But we have a code lab to talk about that. So any questions about Dart and kind of how that's changed? Cool.
To address his earlier question, I didn't find anything about how you were asking about the Flutter web size for Hello World. I don't think they've updated it since May, but the last one I saw was 4 May, which is still huge. But I think it needs to be updated since May when they decrease all the sizes.
All right. So, yes.
It's not over here.
Oh, I didn't share. Let me just share that. That's always fun. Is it there? Cool. So I'll send the link out for this afterwards. But this is a code lab that Google put out. I feel like it gives a pretty good overview of patterns and records. So basically, let me increase that size. So I think we can skip most of this first part. So in the code lab, we'll create a record to store multiple values. So on Kotlin, tuples are kind of the analogous term for that. We'll figure out how to return multiple values from a function using a record. We'll use patterns to match, validate, and destructure data from records and other objects. And then we will use patterns for switch statements and show how that can kind of be used for exhaustiveness in switch statements. Because right now, I think you have to have a default if you really want to be sure that you're have an exhaustive switch statement or when in Dart. But with the addition of patterns, you actually don't need to do that. If you know that that's all your, enum would be the Java equivalent. If you have all of your cases handled, then you don't need your default there.
You mean switch expressions?
Correct. Yeah, like your switch.
You didn't say expression. So.
Well, your switch doesn't have to.
And switch expressions does exist in Java.
Yeah, in Dart they're adding it though. It wasn't in Dart. So to start, I already have all this done, but you need to be sure to have the Flutter SDK, the editor of your choice. This is the code lab is in VS Code, but I don't like that version, so I'm gonna use Android Studio. And then there are a few setup steps. If you go to the flutter.dev site, this does a pretty good walkthrough of if you want to set up an iOS app, Android, and Mac OS. Those kind of have their own specific pre-steps to follow. So first thing that we'll do, make sure you're on the right version. I did that last night. So the current stable is 3.13. So I will be running 3.13 doing this. And then we'll create our Flutter project. So you can do it from command line with this, but I will show you how to do it from Android Studio. So one of the reasons why I love Android Studio's integration way more than VS Code's, there's just a lot more, basically a lot more of the terminal commands are just built into the plugin for Android Studio. So you would need to install the Flutter plugin. I'm not going to update that just in case that takes a while. The one thing I forgot to do. And I already walked through it on the current version, so I'm not gonna test the demo gods. But so once that's installed, and it'll install the Flutter plugin and Dart, this button kind of shows up, and so it walks you through a wizard to create your Flutter project. So we're running a Flutter project, and we're gonna call it the same thing just to make sure that all the copy paste commands work right. And we'll call it that. And put it in the right folder. You can, I think by default, if you do it on the command line, it always just does com.example dot, basically your project name. So we'll just keep with that. And you can also choose which platforms it supports. Mac, I actually don't think I've seen this since Mac OS was not in preview, so that's cool to see now. So you can just check and uncheck any of those that you want or don't want. And we'll create the project. Does my screen still show on the thing? Okay.
I mean,
because it switched to full screen.
It's micro, but it's good.
Okay. Let's do Control-Shift period. What kind of command is that? Fair enough. Okay. So let me arrange that so that's easier. So once we have created the project, we'll need to update the minimum SDK version. So we'll need to make sure that this is using Dart 3. I can't imagine. So the pubspec.yaml file, just for the sake of this demo, we'll make sure that it's on 3. Then since we, I did install 3.1. Then don't forget, once you've updated your YAML, always pub-get. I have accidentally done that, not done that so many times, and that has been a headache. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to edit the main.dart file, and then we'll create the data.dart file. So if you are new to Flutter, the main.dart file is kind of like you can think of it kind of like your app delegate on iOS, where it's the kind of first place that everything loads from, and that's what tells the rest of your app where to go. So we have a main function that calls run app. Every Flutter app's gonna have to do that. And then from there, you just pass in some sort of widget. And that widget has your points out to your business logic and holds your views in all of your UI. And so that class basically just has this build function that provides all the UI for our app. So first thing we'll want to do, so that was the main.dart file. So the first thing we'll do is create this data.dart file. So we will copy this. I wish there was a copy button on this, but there's not. So all of your Dart code on a Flutter app, it all goes in your lib folder. So that's all going to be copied or compiled and then included in your app. So we'll create a new file, call it data.dart. I'll paste all that in there. So this basically has a class of document, and we can instantiate this document with some JSON that we pass, and this is the JSON that we're going to pass to it in a minute. So basically, it's just mimicking if we were going to reach out to an API. So that's why we're doing that part. So we are going to want to replace our main.dart with this code. Okay. What was that?
They should just use the word copy.
I know. I thought the code labs had one, but I guess not anymore anyway.
It's blocked by your son.
The Google Cloud certification, what's that? Quick Labs, okay, Quick Labs.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the things that changed here, I should actually, I'm going to make a famous initial commit statement. Okay, now I can see what's actually changed. So the things that changed, basically we're just using our own class instead of that my app. And then it's going to pass in basically the stock UI that uses material as the design. And you'll note that this is using material 3 right here. And then, so this,
Hey Jay. Jay?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I still can hear her crunching that type.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Probably said really profound things and we missed out on all of it. So.
When did it cut out? Do you remember?
About when you hit that page, but I think we can,
Okay.
yeah, we probably followed watching. It's probably okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Within the last minute, based on the comments.
Cool. Okay, so finally built, and this is what it looks like. So it has that app bar that says title goes here, and then the text in the middle that says body goes here. And just for those that haven't seen it before, the hot reload works like this. So I just saved the file and it updated on the app.
Strings come on.
Unless it's something that happens in its state, in which case it does not.
True.
Because you have to reinitialize.
It's no easy feat for sure.
Right.
So the other thing that the Code Lab wanted to show, you can choose your destination and have multiple of these running. So you can build for Chrome. I'm on a Mac right now, so I can build for Mac OS. I don't want it to have to build all of those, so I'm not going to choose them all, but I can show what web looks like. So it'll open this and basically just runs a local web server, and we'll show like that. So you'll also know that this Android title in the app bar is on the left, but on web, it's centered. So Flutter will know what platform you're running on. So iOS will be centered, Mac OS will be centered, and web will be centered. But the kind of the UI style for Android apps is to have the app bar title left justified. Yeah. So so that's why it's left on Android, but is centered on web. And it'll also be smart enough to know, like, on Android, if you, or on iOS, if you do like a left, from the left of the screen edge, swipe to the right, that's a back, and it'll do like the animation as you move it. On Android, if you swipe from the edge now, it's like hitting the back button rather than like a drag. Because on iOS, you can actually like play with it and go back and forth. But on Android, that's just like hitting the back button. So it'll be smart enough to know the differences in those. Cool. So next. Okay, so now the fun part. So we'll start with return records. So basically, a return is this, or sorry, a record is this. So on Swift, I don't remember what the technical term is called, but tuples, I think, are just kind of the...
Python tuples are pretty similar.
Okay, yeah. That's just kind of the name that everybody's been using, I think, in the developer community. For whatever reason on Dart, it's called a record. So you can have named values and you can have positional values. So this title is positional, so it's just in the first position. And this now, so it's going to have the datetime now value is named. So we'll update and this section to under this. So this is going to, so for those that aren't familiar with Dart's syntax, so this is a getter. It's a variable that just has a getter. So it's going to run this function basically every time someone tries to get it. And it has a type of this. So this is a record with a string in the first positional, position, and then it has a named value with a name modified. So title is always going to be my document. And then when this is ran, whatever date time they run it, that value is going to be put in the modified variable. So yeah, it's always commented delimited, lists enclosed in parentheses, just like tuples on Kotlin or Swift or anything.
We also have the same properties as tuples because tuples cannot be updated.
We will get to that in a minute. So each value can have a different type, obviously, named positional, and to me, I think the biggest use for this is returning from a function. So instead of writing a class, a data type to contain these, it may just be way easier for you to remove that overhead of creating a class and just doing a tuple or record. Okay, so then we will access those fields in our document screen. So we'll add that line to, and that's in the document screen class. But it's QBuild, so I want to make sure that I got that right. And then the text is now going to apparently shift arrow changes the, you didn't code that. Precedent type or copy. So that, and then we'll really this is modifying the line, not adding it. And we'll do that. So this is something that I don't love. Would you mind checking that? I don't love this about Dart, but it makes sense. It just kind of gets in my way when I'm doing development. So you'll notice that this text.
You have to get rid of the constant.
Yeah. So you'll notice this text is declared as a constant value, but I'm passing in a variable. So variables would not be constant values because it can be whatever. But if I change it to that, not that, that's fine.
But if you take the constant out now, it will also complain just in a different way. No, with a constant string. Sorry.
Oh yes. Oh right. I was like, is it?
The blue squigglies.
Yeah.
With a constant string but a non-constant declaration.
Yeah. So this is fine. But then if I remove that, it's at least a warning.
Yeah.
So it really irks me because I love just getting rid of warnings as fast as possible. But one thing I've really started doing, maybe it's not a good habit, is starting with this and being okay with that warning existing until I'm done with whatever major part that I'm doing, and then I'll go back and be like, okay, constant's fine. Because I feel like it's pretty common to put in a static string at first, and then you put the variable in later. It's kind of annoying. You have to deal with that up front. Okay, constant, and then so this is also kind of where it gets weird because the constant is all the way on the column. So even though it's basically saying that this whole thing should be a constant, but because the most inner piece is not, we have to remove that. Okay, so let's running.
You're still selected.
Yeah.
I think it's actually this. So this is one weird thing about the Android Studio plugin that I've noticed. It will do the hot reload, I think, on whichever run destination you have selected in this window. So if I close this, no, it still didn't work. Or I can just click that button.
There it is.
So it should work if you save, or you can force it by clicking this icon right here. Okay, so now it says my document on the top, and then last modified with that date there. So if we go into our metadata, we can see that was the title, and then now is the current time. So theoretically, if I do that, kind of hard to see, but that number is updating every time I do it. Cool. Any questions about that part? Pretty straightforward. Okay, so so this part just talks about so on.
It's true.
So
Do you need a chair? Because you have been standing for a while.
oh, that's fair, I guess. Can you still see me if I sit? Is it
I
lower?
don't know until you said.
I can move, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so so positional values can only be referenced by position. So you'd have to say, you know, .1, .2, or because I think this one, yeah. So this is $1 to get that title, but you can also reference named. Sorry, that's wrong. You have to reference them by what they were. So .1 is actually this Y. So even though it's in the second position of the record, it's the first positional value. Does that make sense?
Is it saying like everything starts from 0?
So these start from 1.
Really?
Yeah. So in this one, to get title, it's $1.
Then how would I address?
I actually
the
don't know. Yeah,
previous-
there isn't a $0.
It's not a good mixed space.
Okay. And then how do I use the first value though? You're getting the second one, but then how are the first?
So this one's named. It's a named value. So you would do .named to get that one. And this one would be .named too. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So that's why, so record $1 is Y, prints Y, and then $2 prints Z, because it's the second positional value.
Non-named.
Yeah. Kind of weird. That is, I think, a big difference in like other languages, because I don't think other languages really do it that way. It's a little weird.
I'm going to use the standard like 0, 1, 2.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not indexes, they're positions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we hot reloaded. Okay. So now we're going to talk about patterns. Any questions about records before we move on? Positional
My
named.
question is still unanswered.
What was your
Does it
question?
share the same property as like tuples?
So I thought that this did actually talk about it, which is why I said that. So let's just try this. Metadata record 1 is something. Yeah, so there's no setter defined for that value. So I would imagine if you go in, well, there wouldn't be a setter available because it's like encapsulated just in this code.
Why is it set up like this?
Yeah.
Because when you create, you can change it to anything, but then you cannot update it.
Yeah. Good question. It seems that way. I thought that there was a way to do it, but
More or less
maybe you just have
read
to, what was that?
More or less read on.
Yeah. Okay, let me. So now we're going to look at patterns. So we can basically use the record and its values with patterns. So we'll refactor this a little bit. We'll modify this to actually pull out each value. So I know you can do this in Kotlin and Swift. I would imagine you can do it in most languages where this before this whole record went into just a variable that we then referenced properties on that. We're going to kind of destructure this record into its individual values just in that instantiation line. So then obviously we have to change this to title and this to modified is what we called it. And delete the curly braces sentence, which is variable. So if we save that, updated. So you can see it's still working there. So kind of an extension of that. So one thing you can do, since we're calling it the same thing here, shorthand for that is like this. So its name is modified and we're calling it, we're making a variable with the name modified. We can use this syntax instead. Cleans it up a little bit.
So it's very similar to like TypeScript destructuring. It's actually like almost the exact same, just instead they use curly braces.
Okay. So then now we get to the little more complicated part. So we can basically, so we're going to replace the previous versions of metadata with one that reads from that JSON. So similar to like codables, we can use that same kind of concept with records. So a codable is, I think that's kind of a colloquial term for it. Basically, you can take JSON and you can have your code, you declare something called title modified. Well, the assumption is then that your JSON is also going to be structured with values that say title and modified. So if you match up those two things, then it gets rid of a lot of boilerplate code of just assigning, JSON modified, putting that into a modified variable. It can just kind of do that for you. Okay, so we're going to change this whole thing to this. So what this does, it'll read from our JSON value here. If it contains the key metadata, we're going to get the JSON from that metadata value, and then we're basically going to pull that title and modified from that. So this is how you would do it without a codable. You'd have to check manually, does my JSON contain this key, read that value, and then just kind of continue from there. And just so you can see it, this is kind of the part that's talking about. So we have a key metadata that it's checking, and then there's a title and modified. So that's the difficult way that no one should ever have to do again, because we have modern languages. We can now do it this way. So I've also noticed Android Studio doesn't always get the tabs exactly right when you copy paste code with Dart. Like all of this is just on the first level, which not super readable, obviously.
Does indentation matter in Dart?
It does not matter, no.
Okay. In that case, it's not a trouble, I think.
Yeah, it's just hard to read.
Yeah.
It honestly reminds me of a Swift case, because Swift switch expressions are all on like the same tab, which is, it should never be like that. Like these should always be indented. Why would they not be indented?
You can right click and say format document.
But I think that is the way that it, yeah. Like it didn't, oh, it did it.
Yeah.
That's weird that when I pasted, usually when you paste into Android Studio, it like automatically formats it.
VS Code does it when you save.
I'm more familiar with VS Code as well.
Fair enough.
I
I hear.
But if you have a preference on formatting it differently, VS Code says, no, thank you.
Oh, you don't have a
No,
choice?
I-
Yeah.
There's settings in there. You can make it.
Android Studio has a way to do that. It's buried in settings, but
Okay, so this is much more easily readable. So basically we take that JSON, and I am actually going to fix this right now because that is the correct way to do it, not the way it had it. And then this goes here. I just reformatted it. Okay, fine, whatever. The code lab does do it in a better way later, so we'll just I'll point that out when we get there.
Rainbow brackets also.
So we take our JSON, and basically we can say the case is basically like attached off of that, and we can say if it's like this is our case statement. So if this JSON is formatted in a way that's metadata title modified with a string title and a string modified, then we do this. So like if JSON case and then our like case, then we do this is the true, else this is the false. That's a much cleaner way of doing that. So basically this whole thing right here is what's in these curly braces here. So it's like it's a case with an if statement rather than like a switch statement.
It's expecting a return, that's why it's red.
Well, it's expecting something in there is why it's red. Yeah. So I could put like this in here. That's formatted. So if this statement is true, and so we have our case assigned attached to this JSON object. So if it matches this expression, then we do this. Make sense? Any questions about that specific part? Because everything else is going to be built on that.
Exactly the case.
Multiple cases would just be additional else ifs.
Well, so it's not a switch statement. It's a case on an if statement. So it's so this kind of talks about that. So basically it's validating that JSON's a map type. So this here is a map. So it's just a static map. So it's validating that first, and then it validates that that map contains this metadata key at the top level.
I think I get it.
So it's like if I had
It's essentially validating that it is
what's the enum and Dart?
JSON is formatted
What's the
this way.
enum and Dart?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yes,
Oh,
I was
that's weird. It did not
actually
autofill.
thinking if it was about the column.
It's that it's valid JSON and the JSON starts with the key metadata
Yeah.
and it has a child key title with a value and a child key modifier with a value.
I always get that mixed up.
Dart format is very confusing.
Yeah, because Kotlin is all caps, and I do mobile development during the day. So then if it's like if but basically it's like if variable case value first. I think that needs to be in a block somewhere.
It confused me. I
So
thought I was clear before.
what was that?
I thought I was clear before, now you got me confused.
So take, for example, this enum. So it's an enum with 3 possible values, first, second, third. So then say we declare this variable is the first. It's the first value of that enum. Does that make sense? So then this statement is more or less analogous to this. So if that variable value, case value first,
Yes, got it.
then it's going to run that. Except our case in this instance is a map,
Yes.
and it can compare this document class with a map. So that's why it's a little weird looking. Did I clear it up?
Just imagine,
Yeah.
just imagine 2 equal signs instead of the word case. It makes sense.
Oh, that's not good.
But it's on the structure, not necessarily the exact values.
Because that's where,
Well, it's type A structure, I should say.
so
Because if you had title that was like an int, that would not match.
Yeah.
So that would return false.
So the value of doing case here is extracting this variable. So if this was just an equals, it's going to yell at me because,
I'm looking at it from the construct of reading it, not necessarily compiling.
sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is the only way to read it.
It's like,
Yeah.
in your mind,
See how much time I saved already?
Right.
It's great.
Is that, at first glance, looking at it from Java case expression is different.
Yeah.
Because they're not that far off from normal case statements because you're using a lambda expression style declaration. So,
And I think Java
which makes
case,
this, when you look at this, you're like, my brain's trying to translate it into language that I understand.
Mhm.
Like Java or Python or something like that.
That's the
or
case
Kotlin.
with native. Python switch
And
case
so-
is like completely different.
yeah. I think Swift and Kotlin also do something similar to this. Because I know in a Swift switch statement, you can have a case, you can say like case let, which is like var in this instance. So you're declaring a variable, and then you say which enum option you want, and then you declare your variable names within the parentheses.
I think I should do Java more.
And this is a little bit different than a switch case, because this is, as James explained, this is more on your type, it's not on
Yes.
value.
Yeah.
With the real value coming, no pun
That
intended.
is destructing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
destructuring this. So it's actually taking the value, it's taking my document from this and putting it in this
That's
title
what you
value.
get.
So then it can be used down here. So that's really why you do something like this. Yeah.
If you've done Firebase data store or Firestore rules, like making sure that data is going into Firestore, it's similar format. Like, so you're testing the state of the variable that's going in, so it's a similar case style.
Yeah.
On the JSON.
So yeah, so say we change this to, I think I can actually run this now. Interestingly, it's only taking the date. Well, it is working. It's just not taking the time. Does date time default to only take day?
I
I
think
think it's May 10th as well.
Oh, duh, because this is May 10th.
Yeah, I was more like,
It's not taking them now.
Yeah, I forgot how to change it. So like if I change that to 11th and save, now that's the 11th up there. And if I change this to something like 1, so it's an int, not a string, it's gonna go to this and say unexpected. Yes, yeah. So
Notice me.
And it's
I'm
not
so used to
blue.
this now. I forgot that was like a, yeah. First time you see this is like, what's happening? So this is what happens basically if there's a crash of some sort. The app itself doesn't crash, the like rendering engine crashes and displays this. It is a little weird. Sometimes you'll have like half the screen crash if you have one of the widgets crash and the rest doesn't.
Well, just
Looks
put
very
one in
bad.
double quotes and you'll be fine.
This is true. I can do that if I do the right one. There we go. See? Okay. So does that make sense? Any questions about destructuring from records? Okay. Or patterns, sorry, not records. Cool. How much do we have left? Okay. So let's prepare the app for more patterns. So we are going to look at the rest of that JSON that's in our data.dart. And we're going to create a class for that. So we're going to copy.
You watch your time.
Yeah. Okay.
Quick
Yeah, what's up?
question. I assume that it'll take optional in the case that if the key isn't there, then it'll be fine. So if you added in like a test key and its value was string, something.
So I'd have to do that. So that didn't yell. So you're saying like if
No, I'm saying just add a new key into your test for a key that doesn't exist in your data that you're getting back. And the only way to have it not be pissed is to tell it it's going to be a optional string. Yeah, like that. And then optional. Yeah. Okay. That's frustrating.
so, and I think that makes sense because the way you would do that in JSON is null. So and now it works. So it will accept null values, but it won't accept missing values. That's interesting. Good question.
It's not like
What about empty string?
Correct. That Firebase does support that very well.
Empty string?
It would, yeah, I would do that because it's a real value.
it's a nominal.
Yeah. But if you want to support null values, you can put an optional.
But the key has to be there.
Yeah.
So it automatically formats everything we give into the platform that we choose it for, right? So-
What do you mean?
For example, like right now we're coding for Android, but as soon as we switch the platform, we're able to build it for that platform.
Oh yeah. So like I can just run this.
So how do like all those things work? Where, for example, for web pages, we have like H1, level 1, level 2 headings. Does it automatically translate?
So it won't translate to like your HTML markdown.
Yeah.
So if we inspect this, so this is the web, it's running on the web. If we inspect this, it is, there we go. So
Oh,
And we're
I
not-
see. There's a Flutter thing.
yeah,
Okay, got it.
so it runs this JavaScript that like handles everything, yeah. And then that populates this Flutter view with whatever it needs to be.
That makes sense. I was like, how do like each other translate with each other?
Yeah, and it uses, so if it was WebAssembly, it would use like WebAssembly to do all the layout, but it's JavaScript basically.
If you're doing an inspector, you're always going to see this though.
Which is what happens with pages, you never see what's in the page.
And I don't think, yeah, in your like Chrome, element inspector won't pick up different things in there because I don't think they really compute to HTML elements. Yeah,
Because even when you scroll back, it's just one element that's
right.
inspected.
Yeah.
You can't really traverse the DOM.
That's nice.
Cool. Any other questions before I move on? I think, let me check. Okay, cool. So now we are going to, oh, yeah, I already copied this. So we're going to move basically the rest of this JSON into this class. So I added it there. And then I want to be able to return a list of blocks. So I need this function. So this is just another getter. Or sorry, this is a function that returns this type. So it'll return a list of block objects, which are defined down here. This is the function name, says that it's a function, and then this is what it returns, or the code it runs. So if JSON is, and then here's our case statement, and that and the element is blocks, then it basically puts everything in this blocks JSON. But you'll notice that it then so it takes this blocks JSON. So this is implicitly any, I believe, but it'll end up being JSON.
It'll be map string dynamic.
Or map, yeah, that's what I meant. And so then we pass that individual block object, the JSON object, into this function, which is defined as this. So then we use case again to pull out basically a type and text. And then we instantiate our block, return that up to this one, and then this is on a for loop. So it'll do that for all of them and then put that into an array. So this is also a syntax that you don't see too often. So we're declaring I hate when force touch. I accidentally do force touch my trackpad all the time. So this is an array. So there's brackets, the square brackets on the outside, and then it's basically populated with this statement. So this for loop itself is returning a list of blocks. So normally a for loop doesn't really return anything because it's not a function, right? But
It's like a list comprehension.
yeah, essentially.
With a little bit different syntax.
Yeah.
It's like stealing some from TypeScript and making its own.
Yeah. Cool. So we have that.
It's like a fake pointer, but like if you're familiar with TypeScript, it's like a pointer function, but in a loop.
So right now I don't think this is used yet.
I mean, even Python has that kind of looping.
Oh. Yeah, but not as a pointer.
Yeah.
So now we're going to use that. Nothing right now is using this get blocks function. So we're going to use it now. So we're going to create this new widget called block widget. And it is going to, so you have to instantiate it with a block of some kind. And it saves it in this instance variable here. So we're going to read the block type. So if we go down here to our JSON, we can see like there's H1, P, and checkbox. So those are the types in this JSON right here. So we want to say if this block type is H1, so this is a pretty basic switch statement, then we want to set this text style to this display medium, if it's P, to body medium, or if it's anything else, sorry, this is P or checkbox. If it's anything else, basically, then body small. And then we essentially just return a text widget that has that text in it. So now we're going to use that widget. So first we need to get those blocks. So we'll add that here.
You have to do a late final blocks document get.
Oh, because it put it in build. There we go. And then we're going to put all of this in the children here. And you'll notice this isn't always apparent when you're coding. But you'll notice all of these comments down here, they're not actually text that's in the source code. It's something that Android Studio has put here to say, this is where the list view.builder ends. So it's similar to like, you can see.
I do that when I'm looping a lot to avoid
Yeah.
like syntax errors and stuff.
So Android Studio just does that for you
Really?
with your Dart code, yeah.
Does Android Studio support coding in Python?
VS Code does as well.
And they have a bracket colorizer too.
Any color you want.
Okay, so we put this here. Basically, this just says, so our last modified is still there. And then we have a list of blocks. So we give it the number of blocks that are there. And then we set up, we use that block widget and pass in a specific block from our array that we declared up here. Okay, so I think I can save. Oh, hot reload's not there either. Oh, because I opened web. I need to stop doing that. Hot reload that then. There we go. So in our data, so we can see we have the text chapter 1 in a H1 type, and the text style of that one was the biggest. And then we have this text here that had the type P, which was medium. And also checkbox was medium as well. And so we, well, it's just the text styles that are built into here. Yeah, body, yeah, display medium. So this goes into the kind of text theming on Flutter, but there's basically like.
Where's the checkbox? I don't see the box.
I'll get to that in a second. So there's like body, headline, and display are kind of 3 levels of text styles, and then with that, in that you have small, medium, and large. So that's why body medium is just
Normal.
yeah, basically that's normal.
There's also like label and like button label style. There's a bunch of text styles and none of them are intuitive. So
And
just gotta play around with them a little bit.
you also have to know which version of the text styles you're on, because that changed at some point. And I ran into that with my personal app, and I think I literally spent a week trying to figure out like what text styles am I using now, because you can only use one set, and if you use both sets, then your app just blows up. And it's anyway. So watch out for text styles if you ever use them. Okay, so in our block widget here, we're basically just taking the text of the block and applying the style based on the type. So even though this is a checkbox, we're not doing anything else. We're just taking the text from this value and then putting it on the screen. So that's why the checkbox isn't showing yet.
How would making it true change the whole thing?
It wouldn't, because we're not reading this at all right now.
It's just formatting the text.
Yeah.
of the checkbox.
Okay, so now I think this is on the next page when we get to the checkbox part. So switch expressions, obviously we use that. The one thing to call out was that case underscore. That's kind of how you would do your, where did that go? So yeah, this is the default. So if you have to switch, that's how you do that. But there is a shorthand like this. So let's copy all this. Actually, that way I can actually show you the diff. Here we go. So don't love how that just overlaps. Well, you can see, so the case is gone on all of them. And then similar to how Kotlin does their
Yeah,
They're,
so
like,
this is like the
contained-
Java or Kotlin equivalent
Yeah.
to a switch expression. So it uses something like, using the symbols.
Error.
So this value actually, this switch statement returns a value, similar to how that for loop returned the list of blocks. The switch statement will return a value, and the way that you syntax-wise would do that would be to have this arrow and then just whatever value you want it to return. So if it's H1, it'll return display medium, P check or checkbox, it'll be body medium, and everything else will be body small. So those are functionally equivalent. But the difference is that we have to declare this text style first, and then are setting that value to the text style in each one of these.
So
Yeah, so the variables on the left side of the switch, so basically it's still an inverted return.
Yeah.
Right, it's just not having to be defined for every case value.
So with the normal declaration where you're not using the arrows, you can't return from a case. It is just a imperative going through, and it's not returning a value. I guess that's my question.
Say that again.
Because,
Yeah, I see this going with that.
Say that again.
if you just Control Z to the previous style, instead of saying text style equals the theme of, if you said return theme of. You said
No, because the switch itself isn't a function, and the return will return to the function.
Okay.
That's why that would not
Okay.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat.
And even this, I don't think would work. I think you have to use. That still doesn't work because the case can't be there, I think. The case can't be there, and you have to use the arrow. So those are the kind of the differentiators in that.
Oh, and their comments as well at the end of the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Because they're not each their own line. They're their own lines within the like switch,
Yeah.
or I guess they're entries into the switch statement.
You can see
rather
the
than
columns
lines.
separated.
Yeah. Any more
I'm just
questions?
glad I don't have to say break anymore on switch statements.
Yeah.
Same.
It
It's like
was,
you literally don't allow me to not to fall through it.
I
So
believe it was introduced in Java in like 14.
Mhm.
When
Finally.
they actually started doing these switch expressions. They
Mhm.
look very much like that.
Well, I mean, C, it's very, very similar to C style, like the, and C you could fall through if you wanted to, or break if you wanted to. Like they allowed you to do that, but in Dart they didn't allow you to fall through even. They just required that you put break there.
Yep.
It's like, why then?
Yeah, they introduced a technique that you could use without return. I can't remember what it was. Dive back in. It's been a little while since I've looked at Java. I know C#, they have a tendency them two have a tendency to parallel each other with
Mhm.
releases, and they did the same thing within a month of when Java released their version.
Yeah.
So another thing that you can do with switches, similar to how we did the case, use the case statement to destructure that record, or the map, I guess. We can use the switch to, so basically it's the same as this. So we're saying if it's this, then this is what we return. So if it's this duration, so this is the difference between right now and whatever time we're passing in. If it's 0 days, then we say today, but we can also destructure that by saying if the duration in days, some value is negative, then we can return something specific. And this days is actually used in the return value.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So does it?
So really think about these as two different things. So like because this can also be, final days. There would be a reason to do this, but
Because that everything matches that.
oh, because this
It just
one
restructures it, yeah.
matches that. Yep.
Yes, order still matters.
So it's smart enough to use the equality operator if there is a constant value, but if you're declaring a variable in there, this is like the map entry thing, but like map entry always breaks my brain.
So basically, this duration, how did they explain it? So it uses,
I'm just trying to figure out how it's doing it. Like I get the technically the use case, which is cool.
so these last two handle durations beyond today, yesterday, and tomorrow. If the is negative property matches the Boolean constant true, then it does that first one.
Yeah.
So that part I think makes sense because that's just a constant value.
Right.
But then it will pull out the value of the in days.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you're going to destructure something, it needs to be towards the end. Otherwise, it's going to meet anything else. So like the same case, no pun intended, the same cases that would match this one, match that. Because it's just essentially matching on all of the constant values. And then there's a getter for this property. And it's just taking that value out and putting it in the days variable that you then just use here. Makes sense. Clear as mud. That one took me a little bit to understand, just like the...
Yeah, I just want to know how the compilers.
Right, like somebody had to code that worked.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Because it's checking equality in the first three.
Yeah.
And then it's also checking equality of the fourth one, but then it's deconstructing into final days. And then the last one is just deconstructing.
Yeah.
Somewhere the compiler's like, no, I got that. It's all good.
Yeah.
so like if these return values didn't have this variable in it, so we can say like
And on top of that, it's all short.
break future
That's how we make a smart compiler. You give it all and get a reinforcement.
Long
get a
ago.
positive answer.
or maybe that's reversed, but so effectively this is equivalent to this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just that it's smart enough to be able to realize that this is constant and then pull out this variable and destructure it. Any questions about that part? So then the code lab tries to get a little fancy and just says, well, so many days ago, that's kind of weird. You'd really want to say like how many weeks ago in that case. And so there's the weird formatting again. So basically, if it's, so these are both essentially, it's not, there's no constants. There's absolutely zero constants comparing against. So it's taking this one and it's saying, okay, I can do that. Well, then you have a when clause. So now I need to check if this when is true. So when days are greater than 7, it's going to say weeks from now. And then if it's basically the same, this part is the same. So that it still has to check this when. If this is true, so days are less than 7, it'll say weeks ago. And then I actually took this one off accidentally. So then we still want to say, if it's within a week before or after, we still say that. Any questions about that when statement?
Why when and not where?
Because of how long?
Well,
I was
there's
just
a,
saying Dart has where on maps and lists and all sorts of good stuff. That just kind of would have made sense, but I don't know.
it's a fair statement. That's
Maybe,
very fair.
Maybe that would have been confusing. Maybe that would have been confusing.
I think they're following the case one.
When Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think if like Kotlin or Swift use both. So a win on Kotlin is switch. They just say win instead of switch. And where I think they also do use them, but that's still a little different because they're using win in a different way. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about the win statement or kind of destructuring that? So now we can actually use that in our app. This is just the nice to have. That was the document screen. Put that here and change this date to that value. And then we'll hot reload. And I have to select that and then hot reload. Oh, there it is, 15 weeks ago. So if I change data to something like
How about like exactly 7 days ago?
20.
It doesn't say a week ago.
Because
Within,
it is,
Okay.
so it would have fallen,
it was looking for greater than 7.
yeah, it would have been equal to 7, so it would not have satisfied that. Cool.
And you also would have had to drop the S on weeks.
I was about to say that. They should have been like week.
Not ready for production for sure.
Yeah.
This will not pass QA.
Plurals and localization on Flutter is also a whole nother talk.
Yeah, I was watching like what's in it, some kind
Developer shortcuts.
of-
So the last part of this is sealed classes. So I think this just kind of comes out of the box with most other languages. But for instance, if you have, well, I guess it doesn't. I think Kotlin has it. I don't remember seeing this on Swift ever. But like if you have an enum, where was that? Do I still have an enum? So this one, it's known that there are 3 values. So if you do a switch on this enum, you're really max 3 case statements, right? Because it's going to know it's either first, second, or third. So if you declare all of those, you wouldn't necessarily need to default. So you can kind of think of that as how a sealed class works. So if you take these 3 classes, for example, and we'll put them at the bottom. So it's a header block is a kind of block, paragraph block is a kind of block, and a checkbox block is a kind of block. So we can seal this block class. And then if we do a switch on the type, we have only so many values that we know exist in the world, and we can drop that default case. So we'll refer to this block class to this. So then, so this just means, we can instantiate it without anything. But this factory from JSON says if we switch that JSON and then we're destructuring the map and the type is H1, then it's a header block. If the type is P, then it's a paragraph block. And if it's a checkbox, then it's a checkbox block. Otherwise, and this is the important part that, because I think if we remove this, this switch says you need something else because I need to know how many classes there could be. So the compiler is smart enough to see, okay, well, in this instance, it's throwing an exception. So these are the only 3 options basically that I have to make this sealed. Because I think if
Not
I,
to always specify an exception.
for this default, if you want to set it up this way, yes, you would. And so the other kind of, you can think of it as a side effect, but you probably also would want it in this case. If you declare something sealed, you can only extend or implement this class in the same library. So like if you, give this code or have a module available for other people to use, other people couldn't extend or implement that class because it's sealed. Because your code has to be aware that these are the only instances of this class. Yeah. All right, so we're going to change our switch statement to use that. So we could say, and that was the block widget.
So would sealed then be analogous to like a private class?
It would.
Like if you're doing Java or.
What's the Java? Not really, because private means that even other classes that you have access to couldn't read it.
So sealed just means it's private to your library.
It's not private to your library. Other modules could read it. They just couldn't extend or implement it.
Right.
So like final,
Okay.
maybe. I think you can have a final class in Java, right? I think that would essentially be what that is. Except that means that also you can't extend it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, darn.
Okay, so this is our new block widget. So it's going to important parts is in this child. So this is a switch statement that's going to return some kind of text field or other widget. So if this block, is a header block, and then we're going to pull out that text value, we're going to return a text widget with that text. If it's a paragraph block, we're going to return text with that text. And if it's a checkbox block, then we're going to pull out that text and the is checked variable and return a row, which essentially is just a horizontal array of widgets. So it's going to have a checkbox first and then a text field second. I think I can. Yeah, I cannot really know. So, oh, it already did it for me. I must have already clicked save. So now it's reading that this, that third block is a checkbox. So then it falls to this case statement and then pulls out the text, is checked, and puts the row. So if we change this to true and save, it actually checks it. Yeah. Any questions about the sealed classes?
We just create a notes, like a mini version of notes.
What?
Did we just create a mini version of notes?
Oh, like the notes app?
To-do list.
You could.
Some text fields.
Yeah.
And some clickable boxes.
Yeah.
Data types.
There's just that interesting Android Studio, how you were talking about how it gives you the helper comments. It's picking on row instead of switch or something like that.
So it does this for widgets specifically. Widgets are classes. So if I did, so like this text is a widget.
But it's picking on the last widget of the
Yeah.
switch.
And this row, this brace is part of the switch. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Okay. Any other questions about any records, patterns, destructuring? I know that was a lot, but we're done. Congratulations. So again, like I'll send this link out in the slides. We always send the slides out afterwards, as well as a video to the whole talk. Yeah. So these are a bunch of links throughout the slides. I put the URL. If there was specific information I got from somewhere, I put the URL at the bottom there if you wanted more info. But these were basically the places that I got my information. The Flutter and Dart team, and I think Google in general is kind of doing this a lot more lately, put blogs on Medium. Sometimes it's on the Google specific sites, but Flutter and Dart do a lot on Medium. So you can subscribe to them if you like ever want any updates. I know Flutter does quarterly updates, so that's why 3.13 came out this month, since May was 3 months ago, or 3-ish. Yeah. So that's all I have. Thanks. But I did want to thank our sponsor. So Google developers. So like Roger mentioned earlier, this is the third of our 4-event series for Google I/O Extended. So we'll talk about things that came up in I/O. The next one is Android Jetpack Compose. But as part of the series, Google was so gracious to give us some funding for the venue spaces, because so far all of our venues have cost money, because we've been able to since we had funds, and they sponsored the food as well. So Naveen, if you want to say anything.
That was awesome today. Thank you so much. I'm going to be brief because I realize I'm the only thing stopping you guys from going home or moving on to spending time with family. Thank you to all the organizers. We do this a lot across, especially my team, across the Americas, where we have GDG chapters. There's multiple other community groups, Women Tech Makers, GDSC, Google Developer Student Clubs. I mean, we do a lot of stuff with startups as well, and we have Google Developer Experts. But what's interesting is this is all about what does the community need. And based on the needs of the community, a lot of our organizers are putting content together and creating these series. So I'm really happy with the series you guys created for I/O Extended and pushing through, and it's all leading towards a DevFest. And so for those who don't know, the DevFest, a developer festival, it's really a celebration of learning content together. And so we're always looking at, hey, what is it that the community is hungry for? What is the content that they need? And accordingly, kind of curate content so that way it can be learned together. I'm going to add something though this time that I was here for a few days, and the common theme of finding venues to run these events was prevalent, but also how to promote these type of events. One of the things I was taking notes of is that this was a very content-rich session today. For anyone who's interested in learning about Flutter, like this is exactly where they want to be to pick up this knowledge. But do all the folks who want to learn about Flutter know about this, know that this is happening? And so I urge everyone to share ideas with all the organizers on how do we promote this better? And one of the things I'm thinking about is that do we need to maybe, because a lot of us are developers, we're not marketers, we don't specialize in promotions. And so I'm going to try to loop in our marketing teams to say, hey, are there sessions that we can host for our organizers on just how to market and promote your individual events more? So I'm always open to ideas on that and kind of see what we can do and what we can change. And one of the things that I'd love to say is that we do this for the community. So if it doesn't work for the community, I want to stop doing it in the current format. And that means that let's be open to change and let's figure out what is it that this community really needs and how do we make it better for the community. I'm not going to take any more time, but thank you all so much. And this was awesome. Thanks so much, Jack.
Thanks, Naveen. So that's everything we have, but did want to say next month, Roger is giving a talk on Android Jetpack Compose. And again, our DevFest is December 2nd and also December 1st. If anybody is interested in doing a workshop, we would love to do a second day prior to DevFest that's just workshops. So if you go to devfestkc.com, there's our CFP up there. We would love for you to fill that And that's it. So for anybody that's on the live stream or on Bevy or the GDG platform, we'll leave the event up, and you all should have the ability to do presenter mode. You can talk amongst yourself if you would like while we're here. Thanks.
Great.